Welcome everyone. My name is Chris Kavanagh and I'm a solutions architect here at TSO Logic within AWS. Today we will be walking through an overview of TSO Logic, learning how we collect data. You'll see a demo of our software and we'll let you know how to engage us for building your business case, and finally leaving some time for questions. Who we are. TSO Logic was acquired by AWS in December 2018. We are now part of the migration services team here at AWS. Our head office is located in Vancouver, Canada, but we are expanding globally with team members now in EMEA, APAC, and East Coast USA. During a typical assessment, you will work with our program managers and solutions architects. TSO Logic matches a service quickly delivers optimized cost modeling scenarios for customers' workloads on AWS. It simplifies on-premises analysis of compute, local storage, memory, and Windows licenses, and algorithmically determines the best fit, lowest cost placement for each workload. Leveraging TSO Logic's agentless collector or through ingesting data that may already exist allows you to replace spreadsheets and guesswork with hard numbers. Using validated processor performance data from Intel and up-to-the-minute pricing from AWS, it gives you the insights needed to transform with confidence. TSO Logic provides the ability to quickly identify, monitor, and right-size your workloads in order to eliminate on-premises over-provisioning when providing EC2 recommendations in AWS. We help our customers by comparing bring your own license versus license included options, quickly confirming if you qualify for additional AWS programs and incentives, leveraging subject matter expertise to help plan for successful migration, requiring very little resources on your end to build a data-backed cost model for migration to AWS. There is some cases where TSO Logic is not necessarily a good fit. Some examples would include modeling of costs from re-platform or re-architecture, for example, non-EBS storage options, archiving options, RDS modeling. We currently match everything to an EC2 instance only on the AWS side. We are currently the best fit for on-premises monitoring of x86 architecture, and although we are not a fit to model soft costs and projected costs as a result of re-platforming and re-architecting, the TSO outputs are used by other teams to produce those results. The value of using TSO Logic for your directional business case can really be identified across these four main areas. The first one here is on-premises. Understanding your compute and storage. How is it currently being used, and what are the costs to operate that compute? The second one, provisioning. Identify over-provisioning and realizing opportunities where AWS can meet or exceed those needs at a lower cost. Microsoft licensing. Really seeing which licenses can move and comparing models to include bring your own license versus license included options like we just discussed. The last one, right-sized. Helping you identify the optimally sized, lowest cost AWS option for each workload based on actual utilization performance data. So where does TSO Logic fit in the overall migration journey? We position ourselves in the assessment phase where AWS ProServe and partners leverage the right-sizing recommendations we have provided. We recommend using TSO Logic prior to application discovery, as you may not migrate right away. An AWS application discovery service is a larger investment, as agents are required to be installed. Once application discovery has taken place, we suggest you layer in financial data and right-sizing into the application mapping. We have the capability to export inventory and right-sizing data to Cloud Endure, who is another partner in AWS, to support migration wave planning. So where does TSO Logic fit in the overall migration journey? We position ourselves in the assessment phase where AWS ProServe and partners leverage the right-sizing recommendations we have provided. We recommend using TSO Logic prior to application discovery, as you may not migrate right away. An AWS application discovery service is a larger investment, as agents are required to be installed. Once application discovery has taken place, we suggest you layer in financial data and right-sizing into the application mapping. We also have the capability to export inventory and right-sizing data to Cloud Endure, who is another acquisition by AWS, who can help you with supporting migration wave planning. So why does it matter, direct match versus right-sizing on AWS? TSO Logic statistically analyzed over 100,000 on-premise OS instances deployed across 20 companies evaluating cloud migration. These organizations range in size from a few hundred to thousands of employees and span multiple industries. The analysis captured hundreds of millions of data points over 6 months to develop a fine-grained model of their real-world OS utilization, usage, and provisioning levels. Overall, we found 36% savings between on-premise and right-sizing. As you can see on the chart here, lifting and shifting workloads was even more expensive as you're carrying all of that over-provisioning with you to the cloud. Our software is powerful at identifying areas to reduce SQL core counts. The ability to tag instances running SQL Server through a CMDB export or naming conventions allows us to look at core reduction. Right-sizing helps realize the potential for modeling things in a different way to achieve cost savings. The next topic I want to discuss is around how we collect data and what does that process actually look like. There are two main methodologies that TSO Logic uses for gathering the data that we work with and put through our analytics engine. The first one here on the left-hand side is leveraging existing data. These data sources range from application performance monitoring tools, CMDB exports, virtualization stack exports, or application dependency mapping tools. TSO Logic does have a preferred format to receive the data import template, and if leveraged, it does ensure a timelier turnaround of your assessment. We do require provisioning details for each OS instance and utilization data if available. If no utilization data is available, we can apply industry benchmarks and then run that through our analytics engine. What we do look for in the types of data sets that get provided to us, we're looking for provisioning information, host names, host to guest mappings as well, so we can see your density of your workloads. The second option here is the agentless collector. This approach involves installing our agentless software to conduct inventory discovery and time series performance data. This method gives a higher level of accuracy as we're getting that time series data so we can see peaks and valleys in your workloads. We recommend running the collector for a 2-week period. We did used to recommend doing it for a 4 to 6 week period, but we really found between the 2-week to 6-week mark, we really didn't see much of a change in our BI engine. After discussing the two methodologies of how we actually do collect data, I wanted to go a little deeper with an overview of our collector and really how it works. The software runs on a dedicated server you would provision in your on-premise environment running Windows Server 2012 R2 or Windows Server 2016. The three main data sources we work with are VMware, Hyper-V, and bare metal devices. Our software currently only supports x86 architecture. When we look at VMware, we communicate with each vSphere virtual appliance, leveraging the vSphere API. Provisioning information is persistent along with our host-to-guest relationship and time series usage. When it comes to Hyper-V, we communicate with each Hyper-V host. We do this via the WMI protocol, and like VMware, provisioning information is persistent along with our host-to-guest relationship and time series usage. For bare metal devices, we use either WMI, SNMP v2c, or SNMP v3. And this allows us to retrieve that time series utilization data that we really want. While TSO Logic does not support application dependency at this time, we can group OS instances by their environment and application via a CMDB export or naming convention. It can be layered into the analysis and will help with identifying further cost reductions. An example of this would be where you might want to run your dev test workloads on demand where they're only powered on for 8 to 12 hours a day and you don't have them running 24/7 in order to help realize further cost savings. Whereas you might want to run your production workloads on 24/7 and you might want to put them on reserved instances. Having these types of taggings and groupings inside of our software really allows you to build out those contextual reports. And you'll see that in a little bit here when Mike conducts a demo of the software and goes through the console, and you'll see how we can build out these contextual reports. Another main grouping that we really like to get is around Microsoft SQL Server. Knowing if a server is running SQL Server Enterprise, Standard, or Web will also ensure more accuracy when we build out your licensing model. Before installing in an on-premise environment, we like to have an overview of the environment to understand complexities, things like the scope, firewalls, subnets. What this allows us to do is build a collection strategy and have alignment on what to include, what not to include, confirm all the required servers in the assessment are supported by TSO Logic software. Our goal is to install a single collector, as we cannot stitch data together into one viewer, and it creates a better user experience when reviewing results. And here you'll see some of the key scope questions that we might ask. This will be in that typical initial phase when you might be getting on a call, figuring out how many data centers do you have, the number of VMware instances versus Hyper-V, what other technology stacks do you have, how many bare metal servers do you have, and are we able to see all of your data centers and physical devices from one single install of our software? Is there any connectivity or firewall concerns? We've went over both of our data collection methods already, but one thing we have not covered was when does it make sense to use one or the other? The first one here, leveraging existing data. A lot of the time this would make sense when you have things like a time constraint. You have a meeting, you need to get business justification. There's data sensitivity. Maybe you don't want your host names getting released and sent over to us. Environment challenges, like I just discussed. Is there subnets or firewall issues? Or maybe you've had another assessment done and you want to just validate those third-party findings and see what output we give you. If you already have great data, why create more work? We can leverage that existing data. Or if you're already cloud hosted, that might be a good case as well to leverage existing data rather than us installing our software in another cloud party vendor. When does it make sense to use the collector? Maybe you want that time series data. You want to see those peaks and valleys day in, day out. Maybe you've got no tight time frame. Or if you don't have any provisioning or utilization data that you can provide to us, you would likely want to use our collector to do that inventory discovery. Or maybe you are ready for a phase 2. Maybe as a phase 1, we just leverage existing data to get a high level overview. Now we're maybe ready to move ahead with the collector and really get installed and see exactly what's going on in your environment. I'd now like to introduce my colleague and fellow solutions architect here at TSO Logic, Mike Briggs. Mike will be giving you a demo of the TSO Logic software and showcasing some of the main features of our tool.
My name is Mike Briggs, and I'm here to talk to you about TSO Logic and how our analytics engine can assist you in building a data-backed business case for migration planning. TSO Logic analyzes data points in an on-premises environment and then matches those servers with the optimal, right-sized EC2 instances at AWS. Gathering the data for analytics is either done using our agentless collector to monitor the environment, or by ingesting data that is already available from existing monitoring and inventory tools. If we're installing the TSO collector, all we need is a VM created within the environment to install on, and after installation we connect to VMware using the vCenter API with a set of read-only credentials, and for physical devices we connect using existing protocols WMI or SNMP. This allows for simple deployment with very light configuration and no agents to install on servers, VMs, or hosts. The provisioning and utilization data from the on-premise environment, either from an export or using our collector, are then analyzed by TSO Logic to understand the environment and the workload patterns of each OS instance. Beyond this raw collected data, we can also layer in asset tagging, such as environment details, the application that is supported by each OS instance, and any software entitlements a server has assigned, such as SQL licensing. You can see an example of all the different types of pivots we gather and can create over on the left-hand side of the screen here. Applications, environments, lines of business, managers for accountability purposes, operating systems, anything that can be helpful to slice this data in different ways when trying to analyze the environment. All of TSO Logic's reporting is contextual, so you'll also see that this data on the right will vary depending which node you select on the left, which is helpful when digging into certain environments, business functions, or licensing to get an understanding of those specific workloads. If I click on environments, I can see only development. If I want to see all the environments for the entire infrastructure, I can click the top level, and everything on the right will reflect that. All of this data together creates a comprehensive view of the current on-prem infrastructure. This can be reviewed in the TSO Logic software to share insights on the current state of the environment. One of these insights is the OS instance classification. Every time we pull a VM or server, we see whether that machine is in use based on current CPU activity. If in our typical 3 to 5 week collection period, we see devices that report as idle 100% of the time, the system will move these into a separate bucket called zombies. These zombies are helpful to identify as they have no utilization and therefore may not need to move to AWS. Moving on from the on-prem usage details, we can look at the most powerful function of TSO Logic, the cost modeler. Up at the top of the screen, we can easily review the current provisioning and utilization data of each machine using this helpful pop-up. This shows the name of each VM or bare metal device, the amount of time it was in use, average and peak CPU, average and peak memory, and the provisioning, CPU and memory details, as well as the operating system. The on-prem costing that you'll see at the top of the screen here as well can either come from customer-provided financial data or by simply using our industry-standard TSO Logic benchmarks. You'll also see we break out on-premise SQL costing to help provide a snapshot of current SQL licensing. Once we've reviewed the on-prem side to confirm we'll be starting the cloud planning phase with a good foundation of data, we can start cost modeling to AWS. Each scenario in the cost modeler in the TSO Logic software has two numbers coming out of it. On the left is the direct match. This is a lift and shift. This is ignoring utilization details and truly showing what each device, similarly provisioned at AWS, would cost the client. Of course, if you're over-provisioned on-prem, you'll be over-provisioned at AWS and likely not making the most cost-effective migration decision. What you'll see over on the right is one of the key features of TSO Logic and our powerful algorithm. This is the TSO right size value. This is where we take the machine provisioning along with CPU, memory utilization data, and we find the least expensive option at AWS that supports the workload pattern we observed for each device. You can create as many scenarios as needed to provide right-sized costing comparisons for your business case. Scenario creation involves a number of simple options for high flexibility. This includes the ability to choose the AWS region, purchase type, as well as selecting whether to bring along those idle zombie machines that I mentioned earlier. You can also choose whether to include T-Series burstable instances based on the client's recommendations and requirements. Another great feature is the ability to add a buffer on right sizing to allow for a bit of headroom in the instances we match with. This is especially helpful if on-prem workload patterns are cyclical or seasonal and TSO Logic happens to have been engaged during a quieter time of the year. You can say, rather than providing me with a 100% TSO right size match, let's do 120% instead, and scale that up a little bit to allow a little bit of breathing room on the provisioning on each EC2 instance. For workloads that would be best suited for on-demand purchase, you have the option to choose how we determine the on-demand model. Selecting on-demand, you'll see we have dynamic power control, leveraging the measured time on or time in use based on a certain amount of hours in a day. Beyond this, TSO Logic also has the ability to find EC2 matches that include SQL licensing, or if a client has software assurance on their own licenses, we can model bring your own license as shown here. This means we will find EC2 instances that support SQL and allow a client to bring licenses, and we won't show a rebuy of those since the client already owns them. Once a scenario like this is created and it's time to move forward with a business case, TSO Logic can help either present simple reporting or can help support a third party, such as a partner, service integrator, or the cloud economics team in building a more detailed report using exports from our software. Hopefully this overview has helped you understand a bit more about TSO Logic and how we can support your cloud migration planning. Please contact us if you have any questions or would like to get started with an engagement.
Great, thank you, Mike. As we move towards the conclusion of this presentation, I want to give an overview of our engagement model. Ask some questions. What does a typical engagement look like, and what time frame can be expected end to end? Running our collector typically takes about 4 weeks end to end. This includes time allocated to our customers getting the VM provisioned and confirming scope. We then have the 2-week collection period, where we also like to start receiving the business groupings and SQL tagging that we've discussed at length. Once the collection period ends, we typically need about 1 week to get everything built on the back end and start preparing final results. Leveraging existing data typically takes just over 1 week. This includes an initial review of the data set and then 1 week period to get final results ready. Average timelines can fluctuate based on the complexity of the environment or data, as well as the collection period. In terms of output, we prepare a detailed summary report outlining your findings, as well as providing access to the console or viewer, which will have your own data set in there. This viewer will be very similar to the one we had seen my colleague Mike Briggs demonstrate for you earlier. The next few slides are some examples of the content in the detailed summary report we send out at the end of an assessment. This particular slide will be provided and will give an overview around the assessment. It will really outline some things like, what method was it? Was this leveraging our collector or using existing data that you already have? What was the scope, the collection period? Licensing details. Did you have software assurance, license mobility, or did you want to do a license included option? Were we provided with provisioning details for your bare metal devices, or did we have to make assumptions for utilization leveraging our industry benchmarks? Any server name with SQL we assumed was running SQL Server. Were these assumptions made? This will outline everything and give you a good overview of some of the assumptions and really what the scope was of what we connected to and the groupings. The executive summary provides a high-level overview of on-premises insights and opportunities where savings could come from migrating to AWS. Things like, was there high idle time? Was there a high zombie count? Did you have a lot of servers that were peaking below 20% of CPU utilization? As well as some details around the actual modeling that you're seeing over here, on-premises compute and storage versus that compute and storage cost on AWS, leveraging a cost model in the future state. Looking at your overall utilization pattern, were percentages higher than normal in some buckets? Did you have a very high zombie count that we don't normally see? Was that something you might need to deep dive into? Things of that nature. Some of the additional content we provide in the summary report would be your current on-premises run rate estimate, and then exciting stuff seeing these same workloads deployed on an EC2 instance at AWS and what those cost savings could be. Thank you for your time today. This concludes the presentation. Today we've explored areas of value that should be accounted for when developing a business case. We particularly focus on the value of leveraging TSO Logic to build out a directional business case and define the different cost drivers when it comes to a total cost of ownership analysis. My colleague Mike Briggs walked through how customers can use TSO Logic to understand their true infrastructure utilization on-premise and to model out what the cost savings could be on AWS, as well as the most effective Windows licensing strategies. We encourage you to leverage TSO Logic for your business case. It is completely free of charge for customers and for AWS partners with the APN migration competency. Reach out to your Amazon account rep today to get started. I would now like to open the floor for any questions.